Delphina here to tell you about a cool project Thane and Crispy have been up to. Battle Damage, a beat-em-up mini art book. It's a zine collecting works by over 15 artists, and it features the fight or flight of battle. Whether it be the aftermath of a skirmish or the heat of the fight, this anthology is not for the faint of heart. If you want to pre-order a copy, visit sevensmith.net/battledamage to find it on Kickstarter until November 22nd. Rah! Thanks so much for supporting our work.
Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams come true!
Hello and welcome to Screen Tones, where we talk anything and everything webcomics. Today we're going to be talking about a fearsome subject, which strikes cold terror into the hearts of all webcomic creators and readers who hear it. That is the dreaded hiatus. Dun dun dun! I'm Rennie. I use she, they pronouns, and I make the webcomic Kate Blast.
Hi, I'm Verathane. I use she, they pronouns, and I make the webcomics Chiralt and Witchwood.
I'm Crispy. I use she, they pronouns, and I make the webcomic Ghost Junk Sickness.
And I'm Delphina, and I use she, her pronouns, and I make the webcomic Somnolus.
If you've been making or reading webcomics for any length of time, you're probably familiar with the term hiatus. Webcomics go on hiatus when things come up for the creator, either on or offline, that impacts their ability to keep updating the story.
Sometimes a hiatus is short, planned break, and afterwards the comic comes back. Sometimes they last a little longer, and unfortunately, sometimes comics never return to updating afterwards, which has given the term hiatus a bit of a bad rap among webcomic readers.
But it doesn't have to be bad. Today we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, so to start things off, have any of you guys ever had to put your comic on hiatus or taken a scheduled break or change things up with the way that you're updating your comic? So tell us a little bit about why.
So most of my breaks, or what I would call hiatuses, happened while I was working on Chiralt. Because I mean, it was my first comic, so I didn't fully have like a workflow figured out at that point. I was creating it in a way that is best described as very chaotic. I didn't have an update schedule at all until probably 7 or 8 months had gone by, and I was making pages very, very quickly, like 6 to 8 pages in a day, and then I would just upload all of them to the website like 2 or 3 times a week. And it took a while for me to realize, like, other webcomics I'm reading have these things called update schedules, and maybe I should have one of those too, because then I could, save the pages that I was producing significantly faster than most comics were updating at that point in time. And around, I think I started in like March, and then in September I decided to update on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And it turned out to be a really good call, because in December of the same year, I burned out pretty hard and stopped making pages for quite a few months after that. And there was a certain period where I wasn't totally sure whether I would return to the comic, but like just enough hints that other people were reading the comic started to trickle in by that point, because I had built up enough pages that it could kind of keep going for a while before it would really hit that spot. So I think the actual visible hiatus of this comic has stopped updating probably only lasted for a couple of months. And then after that, the biggest hiatus I probably went on was when I went to animation school a few years after that. I stopped updating for about 6 months. For part of that time, I was posting kind of a different side comic that I had produced a couple of years earlier, intending to have it as like a short that I could sell at conventions. So I had that updating in place of the regular comic episode updates. And once that ran out, it was just like, okay, it's just going to be stopped for a little bit before it came back. And I guess the once I started, which would several years after that, I wanted to plan much further ahead. So I didn't actually start posting the comic at all publicly until I had finished a good 72 pages or so. And my main goal was to update the comic just a little bit slower than I could make the comic, with that kind of being my goal so that I could avoid needing to take a really long break. And at this point, I mean, the comic has been active for 3 years now, and my buffer has actually grown in that time. So if I encounter like a problem or like I burn out, I get tired or something like that, I have actually on a few occasions just taken a whole month off of working on the comic, and it'll just keep updating as if nothing's happening because I'm far enough ahead. My main consideration now is just that, like, if I see it starting to actively shrink, I'll be like, okay, well, my next goal is to just kind of build that back up in the background.
I think there's a lot of freedom to that approach too, because when you're not under the gun, then you're not as stressed. So you don't necessarily need to like plan those huge breaks because you're just like, I can take a break anytime I want to.
I mean, it's definitely true because being able to like work ahead in my comic, I work in very, very large batches of pages. I'll often sketch an entire chapter before I start even inking the chapter, just so that I can see how the whole thing flows together. And this means that, like, the time where I start sketching page one and the time where I start finishing page one, it might be like 2 months apart, but it's not really an issue because I don't have to post that page next week. It's not going to go up for another 5 or 6 months. So I can kind of look at the whole thing all together and see how the story flows and edit things and take things out.
Um, and to Delphi's point as well, like being under that pressure for making stuff. Thane, you made a really good point as well about uploading the pages at a slower pace than how you create them and whatnot. And I think that's absolutely key because, you know, as we've talked in previous episodes, i.e. hats, there's a lot that goes into webcomics that also needs that extra time to do it. Now, my case is really, really different from like the group here because my comic is made with two of us. So we've actually never ever taken a break just because of the production schedule is always like consistent, and you know what I do relies on the other person, so we always have to keep each other accountable for each step as we go along. And that's really helped us kind of understand our production levels and understand our output because I remember when we did have the tiniest break was our transition from Ink Blazers to Hiveworks. So when Ink Blazers went under, we had applied to Hiveworks, and I think it was at about a month. I think that was the longest place, and so we didn't take a break because we didn't have content or we wanted to step back. It was just because we didn't have anywhere to go or post. But in that meantime, we also did still have the buffer and everything so that were protected in a sense to create our other projects, which was printing, because that is something that's kind of a key part to like how we tell a story, is that printing in the format, it's a big part of it. So by the time we actually got on board with Hiveworks, we had our first book printed, and so that really helped. I still don't understand how we produced the pages that we did. I think we were just really, really excited because I remember our update schedules were once a month we would drop 30 pages for Ghost
That's
Junk.
a lot of pages.
Oh my God.
I don't know. I look back at the Tumblr posts because we would make announcements, and we would used to do these title cards that used to be like, half of the chapter is up, go read now. And I'm like, how? What wizard possessed us? How did we do this? Anyway.
I want to meet that wizard.
Yeah.
I want to meet that time wizard. Yeah.
The
Get
only
them
thing that
here.
I was like really excited about was the fact that I'm like, wow, we got book one out fast. But I would never like put that upon other people because like that was, I think, in a time when I don't even know, we were in college. I don't know what was possessing us. Don't do that anyway. I don't know. So many finals and thesis stuff was due. I don't know what happened, but anyway, it did. And I don't recommend it just because I look back at some of that stuff and I do still have regrets because of the rush. And, the really, really cool thing about web comics is that you do have that time to pickle and think about your concepts as it's slowly kind of coming out the door, because I've rewritten the comic many times because of that.
Yeah, and I think like having that heavy of a workload and have expectation, you're playing Russian roulette there, where
Yeah.
like you in space probably got a little lucked out that you guys came out of that without burning out,
Hmm.
because you give that workload to 9 out of 10 creators, and they're gonna be in for a world of hurt. So
Yeah.
like, so like, it's awesome that you in space were able to pull through that, but also it's like, oh my god, do not do that, people.
But like a big part of it is understanding the output that you have. I don't think I would ever attempt that now, because on top of creating comics and having a day job and blah 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 blah, I with the buffer that we have and we've fine-tuned our process, I have the time to work on illustrations. I have the time to work on community projects, or I have the time to do studies, which is really important to getting better at art and getting to the places I want to be. So I definitely, encourage understanding that process and finding it out. So, like I said, we never took an official break, but, there was still a lot of fine tuning that we got to understand to kind of get us to the place that we are now.
Yeah, fine tuning is such a good way of putting it, because I think we all go through this period where there's like a honeymoon period, like just when we're starting the comic and you're really excited about the idea. And especially, I could see if you're working with space, then you have these two people who are bouncing back and forth and kind of generating this enthusiasm between one another if you're a team. And so that can last for a while, but it's not sustainable. And so when you're trying to figure out your schedule and what's reasonable and stuff, like you do need to get through that part where all of the fresh ideas are out, all your pieces are on the table. Now you're kind of getting towards the boring stuff, and like maybe you need to slow down. I know for me also, comics are a hobby that I do as stress relief. So the more stressed out I was, the more pages I was making, because I just needed that outlet. And so sometimes that was not indicative of what a healthy pace would look like. But, thankfully for Somnolus, I do take breaks. I always have. I take a break after every chapter, and my chapters are usually about 100 pages. So, at 100 pages, or end of the year, I'll usually be taking some sort of break. And it's just it's nice to take breaks around the holidays, just have a little breather, because I'm only one person and I like to try to keep a check on my energy levels.
Yeah, I recommend taking breaks between chapters just in general. It's something that I started doing deliberately with Witchwood, even though I had enough of a buffer that like I could keep posting. And my between chapter breaks, when the comic is not updating for a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks usually, it doesn't mean that I'm not working on the comic. Usually there will be a 2 to 3 week period where I do stop working on the comic, but it doesn't line up with when the comic is visibly on break at all, thanks to the buffer.
And also, a really, really good kind of like little aspect to kind of pick up here is that when you do have these breaks in your comic creating process, it's good to go back and reread the work that you have put out so that you kind of understand how you're growing, where you're growing, and seeing where your comic is heading towards. Because, like I just said, we've rewritten a lot of Ghost Junk Sickness because of how we've grown as writers, too.
So yeah, I'm only one person, and so my philosophy is just, I can't plan when I get sick. I can't plan like when I'm gonna go to a convention, or maybe other life stuff will happen, and like my plot might be going through like something really cool, and I don't want to interrupt it. So the more breaks I can take when I decide, the fewer breaks that will happen in these really emotional scenes where I don't want to ruin the momentum of the story. Unfortunately, right now, another thing I didn't plan was this thumb injury. I'm in a super fun position right now where I am in limbo because there's something wrong with the tendons in my hand, and it's taking a very long time for insurance to forward me to the correct places to figure this out. So I have to make a choice. I burned through my buffer. I went from 2 pages a week to 1 page a week right now, and in that time, I've kind of learned to draw with some of my other fingers, but I'm trying to make it work, but, basically get to the next point where I can get to that plot beat, and then I fully expect to have to, just step out for a little while. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing. I've only got one body. I have to take care of my health, and even though it's not ideal, even though it's not like the most convenient thing, I have to take care of myself, and if that happens, I hope my readers will understand, and most of them are. Most of them are being very understanding.
And that's what you just said, Delphi, right there, is that you only have yourself. And again, I keep referencing this episode. I'm so sorry, everyone. We are the wearers of all the hats. So all of those responsibilities fall on us. And if it's us that are being hurt, well, that's where production stops. So I'm really sorry to hear about that, Delphi.
Yeah, it's fine. It happens, and anything can happen at any point. It's just a really good reminder that
Hmm.
you can be the most responsible person in the world. You can have the stablest schedule, and something can come up out of nowhere.
Yep.
And that's life. You do what you can while you can.
Yeah, and like and just no comic is worth wrecking your health over as well, and so it's definitely good to take care of yourself. Yeah, because like but if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your comic. So my experience with hiatus has been quite a lot for a lot of various different reasons. Some good, some bad, some kind of gestures vaguely at the state of the world. But the longest hiatus I took was a I took a 9 month break where I just cold stopped in the middle of chapter three. And this was, as sort of was mentioned earlier, a lot of people take breaks and use breaks to kind of go back into their scripts and kind of be like, okay, well, how can I tweak this and stuff? And I did some pretty major tweaking of the script and the entire way the story was going, such that where I was in that particular chapter, those changes would change entire plot arcs that were supposed to come up within a couple pages. So I had to basically be a full stop. Okay, we're not uploading until I sort this out. And what I initially sort of thought was going to take me a couple weeks, sort of, you know, redo the script, go back in, dive in. I ended up taking, I think, about 3 months just with going in and noodling around with the script and the total outline. And I came out of that with having the entire outline of the comic done. So it's all basically outlined and written. The downside was it grinded my entire production to a halt. So I had to sort of reacclimate to, sort of, okay, here's how I'm making pages. Here's, some of the things I wanted to study and get better at. All while this was 2020. So everyone knows what happens then. So it was a big, took a lot of effort to sort of start getting back into the swing of things, and, took 9 months.
One thing I want to really, really commend you here, Rennie, with a lot of things is the fact that you often talk about the fact that this is your first webcomic and you're doing a lot of these things as a first of kind of thing. And I
Oh
think that's
yeah.
really, really commendable with how much you're understanding limits and knowing where to stop, knowing where to grow, and to see Kate Blast grow from what it has been. I think it would even 2 years ago to now, because you're taking those steps to make sure that you're good and that the story makes sense to you and stuff like that, and learning at the same time. Like, that's a huge feat, and you should be really proud of that.
Yeah. It's a ton of work, and like, I hammer this home, and basically like half the episodes I'm on, where it's, you got to take care of yourself first and like know how you work and understand your own limits, and
Hmm.
like and not be afraid to sort of adjust those on the fly. Because like a couple of the other breaks that I've taken is I always, as Delphi said, I always do the 2 weeks after at the end of every chapter is we're going to take a break. Let's you kind of take a forced break if you need it, and it also lets the readers sort of ruminate on sort of the things that they just read. So I think it works out very well for comic creators to take advantage of the fact that almost every webcomic takes those after chapter breaks. Because those are great times where you're like, boy, I need a vacation coming up or something. You can plan for that. Or I need to deal with this medical thing, which I had happened to also have this year. Check that off the hiatus reasons box. And I recently changed up my schedule entirely from twice a week to once a week because said medical stuff ended up changing the way I produce comics. Not necessarily in a bad way, but I definitely think that it was me sort of listening to, okay, I'm not making pages faster than I'm uploading them. I need to swap that around. And eventually I'll get the buffer back up to where I want it to be, where it's, I can go back to twice a week. But it's all about listening to what your body and your brain are telling you. And if you can't do that, you're going to burn out.
So we all have some amount of experience with kind of putting a comic on break or taking a full hiatus. So the second question in this episode is about kind of how that break itself was like structured. Did you post any kind of filler content during the break, like a side story, guest art, or other comic related art? And if so, how did you go about choosing or soliciting that?
So like I've said before, we haven't done a whole bunch of breaks or none at all with Ghost Junk, but we did have, I guess it would be considered a break from not posting any pages. With our anniversary last year, we had a call for guest art. So what we would do is we would gather, some cool fan art that we got for the comic, and then update that once a day as the thing to make the site quote unquote active or anything like that to draw people to read the comic while it's on like this mini, I'm going to call it a siesta as art is being put up. So it's a really good thing to kind of like, more low effort on the creator's side, that you're kind of getting this nice art. You're just posting it and, people are enjoying it with you to do that. But I mean, other than that, yeah, most of the stuff has been while we do the comics. So
Was there any kind of like process? Like, did you request the like guest art and stuff in advance, or how did you do that?
we made a call out. No, you don't call those posts that.
We're calling you out.
We made a call for our I think it was a month or so in advance. I think it might have been 2 months or a month and a half, just to celebrate the comics anniversary. So, with the fact that it was just like, oh, this is a celebration too, I think helped gather the art with that. But I mean, I encourage, regardless, like if you're someone who wants to have something updating while you're kind of having a break, or even a creative break so that you can do like a side comic and you don't want to work on the main comic, that's totally okay to do that too. And to ask regardless if you want, like, guest art featured and stuff like that. um Ask it on your socials like Twitter or Tumblr or wherever you're kind of more active in the community to kind of help that going.
You got to remind people too. I see this all the time where people are like, "Oh, I'm going on break. Can anyone do a thing?" And like maybe they did give you enough time in advance, and but you didn't remind people, and it slips people's minds so quickly. So make sure, like, sometimes it's almost more work for me. Like I don't even want to bother like asking for guest art because it's just like I'm gonna have to remind people to do it and have to set a deadline and but it's a completely valid way to go. So just remember to that people don't always remember to put it on their calendar, and they need some refreshers to, oh yeah, this is something I wanted to do. So that's why I'm not really super I used to do a little more guest art. Right now, I just sort of hoard it like a dragon in my little guest art folder, and then if I want to post it during my break, I'll do that. The last couple of between chapter breaks that I've done for Somnolus, I've actually posted short stories that were featured in Spider Forest anthologies. These were standalone stories. They were meant to go into this anthology, but per the terms of the anthology, once it's out, I can do anything with the story that I want to. So they made really nice little interstitial things, just little character featurettes. People really enjoyed those. Um, Again, I don't necessarily want to be doing more work when I'm trying to take a break. So a lot of times I don't put filler content up. I just let things go radio silent for a while. I do try to say, here's the date that it's coming back. I'm going to be back on January something and just hang out till then. But for me, sometimes that's the less stressful option.
I feel like it's important to get webcomic readers more used to seeing comics just go radio silent for a couple weeks.
Big agree.
We're not Netflix. We're not coming out with like a new series every other week. So just like I do think that taking breaks, even if you don't need them, like is a good thing for the
Hmm.
community. It's good to show that readers that like we're not machines. We're humans and we need to take breaks. And that used to happen like with seasons of things. You are used to waiting a little while between season 1 and season 2. So it should be the same with webcomics. Don't stress out over this idea that you can't ever take a break. Don't do that.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. And if anyone kind of tries to make you feel bad for taking a break, tell them to mind their own business. I mean, come on. It's we're only human. So
Yeah. I've done a couple of breaks where I posted content through them. I mentioned in my answer to the first question how I had that mini comic that I posted while I was going through animation school. And I had made that primarily for cons without really thinking about keeping it kind of stockpiled to go up on the main site. But when I just had it sitting on the back burner, I was like, this is relevant. It features backstory on a character that appears in the comic, which isn't need to know information, which is why it was a separate thing that I printed in its own little mini comic instead of with the main books. But it provided a fun kind of break and a diversion. And there was another time that I posted kind of guest art on Chiralt, and it was kind of an unusual period in the comic's life because this was while the comic. So I finished it. I finished the whole comic. I came to the end of the story, and I wanted to wrap up a few threads of like character arcs and stuff like that. So I made about I guess about 30 pages worth of epilogue content, just kind of little scenes showing like where characters ended up, that sort of thing. And timing wise, I knew this moment was coming for a long time. And so I started planning for it, I guess, like, man, 8 months ahead of time. And I wanted to time the Kickstarter to print the final 2 volumes of Chiralt with when the epilogue chapter was running, but I was going to like run out of actual story pages months before that. So what I decided to do was that the comic would wrap up in, I think, like November or December, and then there was a period of about 3 months when I wanted to launch the Kickstarter in March, and I filled the time in between that running fan comics. And the comics that I posted during that time, I had actually received them during the period where I was kickstarting volume 1 of Chiralt, because I made like a little fan comic mini book. I requested fan art during that time period, and I got a bunch of really beautiful little short comics about it. And so when it came time that I was ending the comic, I just asked all the artists who had like thrown things into that little fan comic PDF mini book if it was okay for me to post them on the website, kind of for all the readers to see. And everyone agreed to it. So I had a good three-ish months worth of like steady updating of these fan comics. And then when those ran out, I started running the epilogues and I launched the Kickstarter, and all the timing was kind of falling into place. So it was a lot of planning. It kind of was and wasn't a break because like Kickstarters are so much work. It's even more work than just making the comic.
Oh my god, they are.
But it was a ton of fun. And I mean, I hope I like to believe, I hope that the people who contributed the art enjoyed it, and hopefully that I could kick them a few readers in turn, as kind of link them off of my stuff.
Old timey web ring.
Web rings, bring them back.
Was a lovely time in webcomics.
It sure was. Uh yeah, for me, I did some filler content, some guest art calls at the end of the first chapter and at the end of the second chapter. Um those are mostly, just like wanting to keep momentum going, because one of the hardest parts in making webcomics is the first few chapters. Those are always, yes, there's going to be the honeymoon phase where you start getting into sort of the feel of the comic. You're starting to get going. You're excited about it, but you're probably not going to have that many readers in the first chapter or two or three. That is the case for most webcomics. So keeping momentum going during that time was very key for me. And then I took my first big break in chapter 3, but during that break, during my large break, I didn't do any calls. I just like flat out said, everyone, no new content. We'll see at the end of the year. Um, and just that's how it was. And don't feel bad for doing it either way either. Like, you don't necessarily have to, keep your readers entertained constantly. While it does keep them coming to your sites and remembering that your site is part of their sort of rotation of sites that they visit, if it's not going to be sustainable for your workload, you don't have to do it. It's a lot of planning. Even if it's just like you soliciting guest art, you still have to process the requests. You still have to, manage, like, oh, have you worked on your page yet? Have you gotten this to me yet? And then you have to manage the schedules, and you end up spending a ton of time managing something that's supposed to be a break. So definitely, listen to how your readers are, but you come first.
We talk a lot about like kind of taking care of yourself, knowing your output, knowing how you create it, and the journey that kind of takes hold during this whole process. Because, like we've said multiple times before, web comics do take a very long time to create, produce, post, yada yada yada. I kind of want to dive a little about what you would like other creators or comic readers to know or understand about this whole process that is hiatuses and breaks.
I mean, I think we get into this view that we have to have an excuse. We have to have a doctor's note or something to be able to take a break. But this isn't your job. This isn't school. The assistant manager of webcomics isn't going to fire you if you say no. Um, we get it. It's this Puritan philosophy that work equals morality, and you have some moral imperative to be professional. I feel that a lot. Like, but it's your hobby. This is your hobby. You're probably not making money from this, so it should be fun. And the cool thing about our hobby is that even if you don't accomplish every single thing you originally thought you were going to do, everything you finish still has value. So there are people who they take a break for whatever reason, life happens at them and they can't come back. But whatever you're able to bring to the world of webcomics is something that didn't exist before, and it's something you learned from, and it's something that somebody else enjoyed, and that's really really cool.
It's the beauty of webcomics.
Yeah, it's just such a beautiful medium because I mean, even if you don't finish things, like you did something, you did that, you made a thing, and you should be proud of that. You should be very proud of that. But also know that this is a hobby that has seasons for some people, and it's not a lifelong thing that you necessarily have to commit to. I think that's just really important to keep in mind. When you do take breaks, like I said, I try to stay in communication with my readers if possible. If I can put like an end date on my break, that's something I try to do. But yeah, some readers get really disappointed and entitled about it. um, I had a friend who took a break to work on their print volume. They raised like thousands of dollars on Kickstarter, and it was a ton of work for them. And somebody, like in the middle of this work, they threw this dumb comment on their page during their campaign, like, "Well, I guess this comic's never coming back and it's dead now." And I'm like, first of all, why are you trying to shame somebody into coming back out of hiatus? In what universe
Right?
do you think that's ever going to work? It's super rude. Don't do this.
And anything, you might drive them more to not come back.
Yeah, like I don't think people even think about it because they're disappointed and they just want to vent someplace, but don't do this on somebody's webcomic site. Don't at them, nothing like that. Chances are someone's on break because they needed the break. And they don't need to explain it to you. They don't need to like necessarily bring it to a valid conclusion or whatever. I mean, I'm the kind of person who I really like to try to come to a natural stopping point, but that might not even be possible, depending on what my hand does. So, the fact of the matter is if a comic artist goes on break and you're a reader, they're not trying to personally offend you. Nobody ever died from not getting to read a webcomic. Just take a step back, take a breath. There's lots of other comics out there that are updating, and just understand there's a person behind it.
The audacity. You come to me on the eve of my webcomics Kickstarter.
Well, now at least one person's gotten killed for overreading a webcomic.
Yes.
Serious business.
It is. Oh, yeah. Oh, I think that, like, if you aren't contractually obligated to have a specific update schedule, you should be able to be in charge of when you upload, how you update. You are in control of, you are the captain of your own ship, and your boss is you. So if you need to take a week off, a month off, a year off to handle, life, whatever, do it. It doesn't matter. Like, it's you are ultimately in charge of your comic, not your readers, not the community. It's you. So you got to put yourself first in this. And, like, yeah, some comics places like Webtoons or Hiveworks have things in their contract, and Crispy could probably go into more of that, but they do have some contractually obligated updates, in a certain number of pages per month or whatever, or a certain number of episodes a year or whatever for the scroll comics. But if you're not contractually obligated, you don't do it. If you need that break.
One of the things that a lot of creators kind of get swept up in is that you'll see on social media like a lot of like the hot tips, how to stay relevant, which is great. There's some good stuff to find in there, but it doesn't apply to everybody. And, to Rennie's point about, being contractually obligated to do stuff, I mean, I'm with a publisher that I've signed a contract to do X amount of updates, but that's not the case for everybody else. And that's not the case for people who have it as a hobby or anything like that. So don't ever feel like you're pressured to keep up with like some people's outputs too, because our goals aren't always the same or our circumstances aren't always the same either. And that doesn't mean that you're going to slip into not being relevant either, because a lot of people do actually have varying degrees of updating your comics. So that's something to really, really keep in mind with, maybe it works for me to upload once a week. Maybe it works for others to upload 20 pages a month, whatever, what have you. So, just keep that in mind with updating, how you update, why you update, and, that you don't have to relate to others' speed of output.
1,000%, yeah. And, like, and like a lot, like the vast majority of webcomics creators are people who are making their first webcomic. That's generally speaking the majority of the community. So you're still new at making this craft. So like take the time to like mess around, play with the mediums, get dirty, make mistakes. You'll learn a ton that way. And if you don't give yourself the room to learn because you're like, oh, I have to draw these 3 pages this week or else I'm going to disrespect the family. I don't like that's not going to happen. Like take the time to learn and like build that into your schedule. And if you're on a roll, maybe go at one upload a week and use that time and to build a buffer and learn. That's entirely reasonable strategy, especially for newcomers to the medium. You gotta let your life dictate the needs of your schedule, and it shouldn't be the other way around because that's a surefire way to burn out and lose friends.
Yeah, I think one of the when it comes to taking breaks, I feel like so long as there's any amount of communication that a break is happening, like that goes a long way to mitigating any like salty feelings. Aside from the readers who are going to be crappy about it, but they'd probably be crappy about it anyway. Honestly, don't worry about about
Tell them to
them.
get off your back.
Yeah. Another thing on the subject of readers, I mean, it is true that when a comic is not updating, it'll see like a drop in traffic, and sometimes readers may drop off and go elsewhere. But like that happens even when comics are updating actively. Like readers also are growing and changing as people, and there's kind of a natural attrition of readers as you gain new ones. Like old ones, get older, they lose track of the comic, they come back to it 3 years later. Like you don't know what's going on with them. They're doing their own thing, so the most you can do is kind of try to post when you return, and maybe let people know if you expect that there's going to be a long break in updates, and that's your responsibility.
And I do want to point out that there is a lot of valid paranoia with taking breaks and, quote unquote, losing readers, having people shift and stuff like that. With the fact that nowadays you can see those stats directly if you post on something like Webtoons or Tapas with the subscribers. And I will say that a subscriber isn't necessarily a reader either. So that's something to kind of keep in mind because I've definitely seen it bog down quite a lot of people. And that's a really hard battle to kind of fight daily.
Webtoon subs in particular are so weird because the readers who subscribe there, many of them are so casual that they might not be actually keeping up with the comic. Maybe they subscribed like on a whim when they saw it in a promotion and they haven't read it. And then what can happen sometimes is if the comic is not being actively featured on the site and isn't gaining readers super quickly, you might go through a period where every time you update you lose subs, and it's a weird and bad feeling. But it definitely, that by itself kind of went a long way to like making me be like, oh no, I can't stop updating or I'll lose subscribers. It's like, well, no, updating also loses subscribers. Weird.
Yeah, funny how that works.
Yeah, and I in no means is that a reflection on the work. I think that this is just something that is unfortunately new to some of the platforms that can get people really, really bogged down, like I said, with those numbers. So I would 100% not equate like your worth to your work to a metric like that.
I feel like, I mean, Webtoon as a platform is fairly new, but I feel like the only thing that's new about that trend among readers is that it's more visible because there's a number attached to it. Like when it comes to like the more traditional school of webcomics that are updating on like their own website, you probably have no idea, except in terms of looking at like monthly traffic hits and whatnot, how many people are reading, who stopped reading, who came back after 5 years, that sort of thing. But now it's kind of more easily tracked, I suppose, through the subscriber numbers.
I'm blissfully ignorant.
It's true.
And part of the other problem is that all this information is so public, so that like it gets into this this public psyche that you have to perform, and it's not necessarily even true. It's this weird mentality that comes up anytime like stats get involved too. So like you can't really let stats dictate your breaks. That's not healthy.
No. I feel like if there's one thing that I would want to say to like other creators or new creators is just like, don't be afraid of taking breaks whenever you need to. Like, the fact that you have launched a comic does not mean that it's a promise to keep updating it forever. So just do it if you need to.
Yeah, the amazing and universal thing is that an absolute majority of webcomics are free, and the creators who are creating webcomic are doing it mainly for free. Not a whole lot get a whole lot of money to make these things. So just kind of take that, put it in the back of your head. And my favorite comic will return. I'm hoping they're having a great break because this is a nice little service that they're doing for the community. I'm reading a nice free story. So I totally get being discouraged when my favorite things aren't, there, and I'm just so anxious to see where they go. But it's definitely a staple to creating, not even with web comics, with anything at all, like whether you be a musician or a painter or printer or whatever. Taking breaks for some kind of creative output or even just work in general will save you in the long run.
Yeah, don't get those repetitive stress injuries. They're bad.
Oh
Oh
yeah.
God, like I said, no webcomic is worth hurting yourself over. And even when you're like not working on your comic, you're still taking in creative influence, whether it's from life in general or from the things you're watching on TV. Or so it's like you're still moving forward in a strange kind of way. Well, I think that this is a pizza roll-up wrap. Uh, thank you for listening to this episode. I have been Rennie, and you can find my work at capeblast.com.
And I've been Verathane. You can find my work at chiralt.sevensmith.net or at witchwoodcomic.com.
I've been Absolute Crispy Crunch, and you can find my work at www.ghostjunksickness.com.
And I've been Delphina, and you can find my comic Zombulus at zombulus.com.
And we'll see you later. Now, we're going to eat so much pizza when Screen Tones goes on hiatus.
I'm going to
my
roll my
gosh.
pizza.
Oh,
No,
like a
that's
calzone?
wrong.
Deep fry it. You got to
Oh,
roll it and
yes.
deep fry it.
Like
Oh.
extra calzone.
Oh gosh. Okay, you know what?
Thank you for listening to Screen Tones, a webcomic podcast. Want to know some other ways to support us? Check out our Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/ScreenTonesCast, where your support will help us create more episodes, reach cool extra bonus goals, and keep us talking about anything and everything webcomics. You can also find us on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and our Discord server. Thank you so much for listening, sharing, rating, and supporting, and we'll see you next time.